Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I was delighted to hear the conversation that the four panelists had, because these are gentlemen who, like many of you, put the money where the mouth is. I have the advantage of getting two of your kind to put money where my mouth is. So we have, I think the reason I am here is that I too have co-promoted a small venture in the rural healthcare space, and we have two investors, and as I speak to you today, I am delighted to inform you, they know about it, that it looks like their investments haven't been such a bad deal after all. They seem to be reasonably happy with their investments. But that is just to strike a personal note on why I am here. I want to touch on one of the points that was made towards the fag end of the panel discussion, which is that you need to educate India about what this animal is, this animal called private equity. Because there is ignorance somewhere, there is suspicion somewhere else, there is clearly a lack of willingness to engage with your community, and therefore a lack of the right kind of regulatory responses, if regulatory responses indeed are required, to ensure that private equity contributes much more than it has done to the India growth story. We did hear reference to India's high savings rate. Regrettably, that savings rate in the recent past has slipped a bit. It's no longer as good as it was last year or the year before last. But that notwithstanding, even today as we meet here, the India story is arguably one of the best stories going around the world. I cannot, and I must be among the oldest in this group here today, I cannot recall a time when every 3 days you had a new scandal or a new scam on the front pages of the newspapers, and yet a country growing at an unacceptable rate of 6.9%. I was here in the same venue sometime last month as the chairman of a jury to select some of India's best performers in the financial sector. And at the awards function, which was held here, the deputy chairman of the Planning Commission said something very interesting, and I want to relate to you. He said it in his inimitable manner, but I want to relate to you what he said. He said that times without number in the recent past, he's got out of conference rooms only to be accosted by young men and women who shoved their mics very close to his face, uncomfortably close is what he said, and then tell him, Mr. Ahluwalia, now that the growth rate has plummeted, this is what he said, to 6.9%, how do you intend tackling this crisis? To which I am told his answer is, why don't you travel around the world and tell some of the other people that 6.9% growth is a crisis, and then I'll come up with a good enough answer to your question. So notwithstanding all of what we see in the papers, all of what we hear, India today is still a growth story. And I think it's important that people from this industry see the way to playing a much larger part in the growth story for a nation that can do with a lot more capital than it has at present. I think it's important to say that institutions must understand this asset class and invest their money in this. Easier said than done, given some of the constraints, real and imaginary, under which they operate. Therefore, recognizing those as constraints, you still need to find your way around. The other issue is that in all aspects of life, and certainly in the area of business, you need to have reasonable comfort about the regulatory space in which you operate. You cannot have changes that are far too frequent. You need some kind of certainty, some kind of continuity, some kind of clarity in the regulatory framework within which you operate. You cannot, if I may give an analogy from the game of football, have changes that take place when you're halfway through the game. You need to be told up front what is the set of rules in which you operate, and then unless there are good enough reasons, not see knee-jerk reactions based on something or the other that's going wrong. The other real issue is for people in positions of responsibility. I don't call it positions of power. Power is a non-existent concept now. But people in positions of responsibility to ask themselves what the objective is of what they do. People that write out checks, for some of you, are not people that are crying out for regulation. They are people that understand what risk is. They are people that are willing to trade the higher risk for promised higher returns. They are people with deep enough pockets who can ride out the occasional problematic investment. And therefore, to attempt to put in place a regulatory structure that seeks to extend near similar protection as you would to retail investors is clearly putting in place a regulatory framework that will kill the industry and therefore partly damage the India growth story. Because history has shown us that where regulation precedes markets, markets don't grow. Regulation must necessarily follow. Regulators don't paint on blank canvases, don't write on empty space. They have to recognize the ground realities in which the industry functions and therefore put in place the kind of things that you need to do to ensure orderly growth consistent with the interests of all the stakeholders in that particular space. India clearly is a country that has limitless possibilities in terms of entrepreneurs all over the place, fire in their bellies, great ideas in their minds. The missing piece in the process being somebody to handhold them in the early stage, somebody to help them out with the capital, somebody to explain to them at the early stages of the growth that compliance and governance are two different issues, and therefore the road from compliance to governance is a road that they must travel with somebody holding their hand. I believe there are enough opportunities for people to go and find those that have the great ideas but need the help, the hand-holding to take them forward. And that, I think, is what is going to be the opportunity that you people will have to co-script the India growth story, the story that brings India to the center stage of the world, establishes India's primacy that we had several centuries ago. When I look at what is happening in this country, and I'm not talking about politics, I don't understand that luckily. When I look at rural India, which is where I come from, I recognize that a lot of good ideas are going to seed because they're not recognized in time. The potential is not recognized in time. And I'm often reminded of 4 lines that one of my favorite poets wrote, which, if I may crave your indulgence, I will quote for you. Thomas Gray, in his elegy written in a country churchyard, said, "Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Full many a flower is born to blush unseen, and waste its sweetness on the desert air." And that is what is happening to a number of ideas. They're lost somewhere. So I think it's important to find those ideas, help those people not just to get up from where they are, not just to stand, but to run, because they will be the pace setters of the India growth story. You've done great work. You will continue to do even greater work. But part of that will be enabled only if you understand the role that you have as educators. If the advocacy function for the industry is something that you carry out even as you make your investments. I'm reminded of something that I learned in school, and many of you learnt it in school too. Long before I knew that there was something called venture funds, long before that, I heard this statement: nothing venture, nothing gain. Wish you, gentlemen, all the luck that you need in the days ahead. Thank you.